Absolutely. And to sort of connect it to, to the broader movement federally that, that Peter is working to build momentum for. I think the work of community-based organizations like GreenUP is really essential in building the broad support for that kind of federal transformation. And also I think the federal government plays a really essential role in enabling civic participation in climate action and in movements like the Green New Deal. And so much of what GreenUP does is really trying to support community, like meaningful community participation in environmental policy making and also in climate action. And one of the things that we really experience, as it relates to big issues like climate change, is that we're all starting at a different place, and that where we start really matters, and that it takes time and resources and trust to build a movement like the one that Peter is working to build, and to gain community support for those sorts of initiatives. And we do all kinds of work in the community, and specifically around climate action. We often work with communities that face unique vulnerabilities to climate change, or that face barriers to participating in civic decision making or public space making that impacts their exposure to climate change or their ability to take action to mitigate or adapt to climate change. And that's really important. And even here in Ontario, in the Ontario NDP's Green New Democratic field, they identify specifically communities that are really important to engage in this movement and in mobilizing the Green New Deal. And that's, that's sort of fundamentally the work that GreenUP tries to do, and organizations like GreenUP try and do, is to support vulnerable populations or communities in finding the tools and resources and confidence and voice that they need to be positive actors that are able to take climate action in ways that resonate with them, that meet their needs, that safeguard the things they care most about. And so when we think about our work and do our work in community, that's often where we start. GreenUP does work with neighborhoods often to develop climate change action plans, or to develop visions for public space that support environmental goals. And often one of the places we start with, are questions like, what do you need? What do you want? What do you love about your community? What feels really important to safeguard? And I think those questions are really important, because they help people to think about, not just climate change as like this global challenge that we experience, but like climate change is like a highly localized and context sensitive personal experience that we're all navigating, and helps them to really think about the climate change issues that impact them and their communities most intimately, and also to think about what their role in addressing climate change and taking climate action can be. And so that's a lot of the work that GreenUP does. We do that through our Sustainable Urban Neighborhoods program and through our neighbor plan program, and I think that's really important. Like, I think we are in a democracy, and and we need people to be, we need like a groundswell of support to be holding governments to account, to be ensuring that these things remain political priorities federally and across the provinces, and then also municipally, and that's really important. And some of the other focus areas for us, in addition to supporting communities in planning for climate action, or thinking about how climate change most directly impacts them, is also that capacity building piece, because that's really important too. And it's one thing to identify what needs to happen, but it's often quite another thing to make that happen. And especially in under-resourced communities, that can be a huge barrier. And I think if folks feel like they don't have the capacity to make change, or they don't have the resources they need, that can be a that can be a pretty insurmountable disincentive to take action. And so we do a lot of training and skill building programs as well in the community. And we don't, we really try to take, not to take for granted where people are coming from or what sorts of skills they have, but instead to really try and like build those relationships and support those training opportunities and and collaborative educational opportunities that give people the the skills and the confidence that they need to say, I'm experiencing flooding in my yard, and what will really help me is to be able to install a rain garden, and now I have the skills and the friends who could help me to do that, and together we can take action. Or I'm going to do something in my home to support reduce energy costs, and and I feel like I have a sense through engaging with organizations like the one you mentioned, Endeavour and Builders for Climate Action, of what would be the best thing for me, and what my goals are, and who I can reach out to support that. And I think those those community relationships and those those sort of like fundamental skills and agency it's like so important for making this for mobilizing this kind of movement.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm just looking at the chat here, and there's some good stuff here, and I think it ties into what you were just talking about. Is it's giving people the support they need to make positive choices around the environment, setting goals for what they're capable of doing, and connecting people with resources to do it, but also to build a community around it, and to build class solidarity around what we can do collectively, as well as what we can do individually, but focusing on building that relationship. And how important do you find building a relationship around positivity, around inclusion, but as a means of building community through climate action?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fundamental. And I think, part of the reason, like, I think it's, I think around any issue, like that sense of community and collective agency is really essential. But I think around something like climate change, where it's like, it's such a global tragedy that we're all experiencing. And it feels, I mean, I think like I have so much privilege in the work that I do and the relationships that I have, and I still often feel like, what are we like, what, it's not enough, it's not fast enough. Like, I feel a sense of despair around, around the momentum that we have related to climate change and climate action. And, and I think that that's something that so many people experience. And so I think in relation to issues like climate change, it's even more important that we have each other and that we're able to work together. And I think, and I think that really reinforces the need for governments at all levels to be sort of like consistently supporting climate action, to not be minimizing it. Like, there's so many intersecting issues, and they need to have, they need to be thinking about so many different areas of focus in terms of policy and legislation. But climate change needs to be, it needs to be sort of like fundamentally part of the agenda all the time at all levels of government, because I think we need to see that leadership. But I also think, our approach to climate change, broad federal programs or provincial programs are really essential. I also think that, community-based approaches and federal and provincial support for resourcing those community-based approaches is also really essential, because, while federal policies and programs may have a really broad impact, they're, communities, and especially communities that face unique barriers to change or unique vulnerabilities, they need solutions that they're generating, that they're implementing, and they need the resources to be able to do that. And that's a really critical role for other levels of government, is really resourcing those local movements and doing that in a way that isn't, that's consistent and that's generous and that's flexible. Because I also think, for communities that, and like, and Indigenous communities would be a perfect example, like where there's been a really, colonial and negative ongoing relationship, you know, giving money and then withdrawing support, you know, and then changing policies and giving money again and withdrawing, like that really does not support the relationships and trust that is needed to build a long-term movement to address climate change. And so, you know, we really need to see a sustained investment in community-based approaches to addressing climate change, because, you know, that's where so much of like the, you know, the creativity and like the long-term support and momentum for this kind of work comes from, is like that investment from local communities and in local communities. And so I think, yeah, it's, you know, those relationships and the relationships sort of like across organizing levels of society is so important.